Now let's proceed with the upgrade, a distro upgrade from version 5.08 or 5.08 to version 6.x or 6.01, the current latest release. Again, for your installation it may be slightly newer like 6.1 or otherwise, but nonetheless the idea is the same. So we currently have a shell open. We're going to SSH to the target. The idea is if you're performing a distro upgrade using apt-get or aptitude, you should SSH into the remote system as opposed to performing the distro update while logged in from a graphical environment. And that is because as packages are updated, such as the x.org or SSH or other services, those services will be restarted as a consequence and are subject to disconnecting or discontinuing your session. So ideally you should SSH in or find a means of consoling in when upgrading the system, or of course use media or TFTP via Pixie to do it across the wire. So with that said, let's SSH. We're currently logged in as user LinuxCBT, so we'll SSH as LinuxCBT to the target system, 75101. We'll accept the public key, authenticate momentarily, and then once on the remote system, we'll cat etc Debian_version. So it's at 5.08. Now, to set this environment up, there are a number of things that we need to do. We need to update the etc apt sources.list file to point to the new mirror. That's the mirror that contains the 6.01 service or tree. To check this, what we should do is navigate into etc apt and cat sources.list file. Currently, we're pointing to mirrors.kernel.org/Debian followed by Lenny. Well, it's dists in between, but then Lenny, with the option of pulling files from main as well as contrib. But we're now interested in pointing to the latest version, not Lenny, but Squeeze. So to confirm all this, we could use a tool like LFTP, which gives us an interactive shell to connect to the target to see the new structure. So let's Control-Shift-C, and we will get this into memory and try to connect to the target using LFTP. And this will place us on the server momentarily, and an ls will show us the contents of the target. So once connected to the Debian mirror, there's a subdirectory dists. This is a standard mirror. So this is the structure that you should expect to find across mirrors. Navigating into dists, we see a number of directories, including Debian 601. This is symlinked out to the current version, stable version Squeeze. So really it's dists Squeeze, and within Squeeze you'll find main, non-free, and contrib. So really we want to upgrade or change our apt sources.list file to point to Squeeze as opposed to Lenny. Navigating a level up into Lenny, we see a similar structure, contrib main and non-free for Lenny, version 5.08. So again, to rectify matters, let's su in, because again, if we lsl sources.list, we'll see we don't have the permissions to change a file, simply to be able to view the file. So we'll su in and modify sources.list. Now we'll comment the current line. We'll cut it first, paste it twice, comment the first line, and then change Lenny to Squeeze. So that will update this file once we've saved changes. The security updates will also need to be updated. For now, we'll disable them to avoid any confusion, as apt-get as well as aptitude processes sources.list in the order in which entries are presented. The CD-ROM entries that are here can also be removed because we'll no longer reference 504, the original set that we used to build this system. So let's remove the two CD-ROM entries. So we'll have to take a look at the security settings, updating them to Squeeze for both source and binary packages, and the last entry, which points to Squeeze, will suffice. This is an extra entry we place to be able to install Handbrake at some point. It's currently installed. Now, it is suggested that when you perform a distro upgrade that you remove packages that are not included as part of the original Debian build, such as Handbrake, for example, which was not included. So we could use dpackage to remove it if we'd like. But we can try the distro upgrade and if it does not complain, proceed as usual. Now let's remove these references to the individual mount points 1 through 5 for the version 5.04, as we no longer need them. So let's save the changes, drop our root shell for now, and we can even update our documentation to reflect what we've just changed. So let's navigate into Deb6x and into docs and modify notes.txt. At this stage, our new task is to perform a distro upgrade from version 5.0.8 to version 6.x or 6.0.1. So our tasks include 1, to update etc apt sources.list to point to squeeze distribution tree. 2, or A as a subtask, comment references to Lenny, or prior version if you're coming from a previous version. And by the way, when performing distribution upgrades, it's suggested that you perform from the immediately preceding version. So we're going to version 6x and we have version 5x installed, as opposed to skipping versions from 4 to 6, for example, for compatibility and developmental reasons. So with that said, we've commented it, and our next step is to perform an apt get update. Now, another note is that when performing these updates, it also helps if you cancel or terminate as many production services as possible to avoid contention when those services need to be restarted. So if users are connected to your system, you can perform a distro update, but in the event that a service needs to be restarted, those users will be disconnected. So let's say users connected via SSH or Apache or Bind, performing queries or DHCP or otherwise. So let's just note it is ideal to perform distro upgrades with few to no users connected. But that isn't always possible, and the update will, or upgrade will, work with users connected. But to avoid contention, it helps if you can avoid it altogether. So let's SU back in, and we'll perform an apt get update. The reason why we perform apt get update is to download the latest list of packages that are available for the sources that are indicated. So if we cat etc apt sources.list, we need to tell the Debian package manager about the presence of the packages associated with the squeeze distribution on this particular kernel mirror. Now, just in the event that you're wondering why we didn't perform an intranet-based update, it's simply easier for us to connect out to the web. If you're upgrading multiple Debian systems, then by all means, mirror one of the public mirrors internally in your operating environment, and then reference the mirror using a deb line pointing to your internal server, perhaps using an FQDN or an IP address. But if it's a one-off system, such as ours in this case, then it behooves us to simply point to the internet as opposed to downloading the full mirror for this particular platform, which is i386, which is roughly 40 gigabytes. So it just saves us time from having to pull all that data in, but rather to just pull the packages that are of interest. Another thing we should note is that a distribution upgrade will upgrade the packages that are relevant. So let's just renano just to make that point. So let's navigate towards the bottom, and let's just note, as a feature, distro upgrades will upgrade packages that are relevant. This basically means that of the possible 29,000 packages, if you are employing only, let's say, 300 of them, then only those 300 packages will be updated. And that requires far less bandwidth than downloading all 8 DVD ISO images or mirroring a public mirror. So distro upgrades will definitely upgrade packages that are relevant, and one caveat is that distro upgrades as a consequence may also remove no longer supported packages. This happens. And we should also note as a suggestion, it is suggested to remove non-Debian packages or non-original Debian packages, non-distro packages, non-original Debian packages from the source system prior to upgrade. And a case in point for us would be Handbrake. But we'll let it be and see how the upgrade proceeds. So let's SU back in. In fact, we dropped the connection inadvertently, so we'll just SSH back in, and then SU back in. And then once in, let's go ahead with that apt-get update. If you apt-get with the help option, you'll see a number of options. Update retrieves a new list of packages. So we'll apt-get update. And this will download a list of new packages from the squeeze distribution. Now, there's a compressed file within each mirror which maintains a list of packages that are available for the release. So we're not actually downloading all of the packages or communicating with all 29,000 packages as headers, for example, ascertaining metadata. We're simply pulling in the compressed file which contains a list of items that are available. So now we know of the packages that are available. Just like that, our system knows. They haven't been installed, obviously. That takes actual bandwidth to match the packages that we currently have installed. In fact, you can get a sense using a depackaged list, piping the output into WCL as to the number of packages that are installed. So roughly just under 1,200 packages are installed of potentially 29,000 packages. So we're well under 10%, we're roughly 5% of the packages that are available, which means, say, 5% of 40 gigs. You're talking a meager 2 gigs as opposed to the full 40 gigs if we were to mirror the entire distribution. So now that we've performed the update, the next step for us is to perform a distro update, and that's a separate option. So if we depackage, or in this case apt-get, we've already depackaged. Let's apt-get help, and there's no harm in rerunning it, by the way, so long as the database is up to date. You'll see that dist upgrade is one of those options. This is a distribution upgrade. So let's apt-get dist upgrade, and this will perform a pull of the packages that are required. Now here is a synopsis of what needs to happen. 960 packages need to be upgraded. 526 packages will be newly installed. 46 packages will be removed, and 1 will not be upgraded. So this needs to get 1.2 roughly gigs of archives off the net. And it tells us after the operation, 1846 megs of additional disk space will be used. So roughly 1046 megs, that is, of disk space will be used. So another gig is necessary. And it asks if we'd like to continue. If we scroll up, we see an A to Z dump of the packages that will be upgraded. Here's a package that will be kept back, the MySQL client, and the following new packages will be installed. So an A to Z of new packages. Now, you may be wondering why such a discrepancy across versions. A number of things happen across versions of Debian, or any distribution for that matter, including the consolidation of, or in some cases the expansion of. So there's sometimes a collapse, sometimes an expansion of packages, a spread, for example. So for example, let's say Python was originally distributed as 3 packages, but for manageability is now distributed as 7 packages, spreading out the various components. So sometimes components are spread, and sometimes they're collapsed, expanded and collapsed. And that explains some of the reasons why you'll find familiar package names like Python, Perl, PHP, Apache, and so on varying in the number of packages across versions of your distribution. And in some cases, they're just new programs altogether. So in some cases, packages are obsoleted perhaps by the vendor, the developer, or by the Debian project. So a number of things occur across versions that will cause your packages to be changed and either be represented by more or fewer packages as a consequence. So let's continue. Perhaps we should have continued already to have the process begin downloading. Now we're currently in our GUI run level, so the whole GUI will be restarted, but that will not impact us because we are connected via SSH using a shell. So as a consequence, we should not see any ramifications of that. Now, as the packages are applied, as they apply to services that are running, this distro upgrade, just as we saw before when we upgraded from 5.07 to 5.08, will restart services on the fly, sometimes resulting in failures, but nonetheless invariably resulting in connections being terminated as a consequence. So as we take a look, we see the first batch of packages are being pulled from the main tree. The bulk of the packages come from the main tree because, as we've mentioned, the main tree represents truly open source, free packages. Some of the packages come from contrib and others come from non-free. In our case, non-free is a non-issue because we're not referencing in our sources.list file non-free packages, which may or may not be helpful to us because there are some important useful packages in the non-free branch. So at some point, if you need to provide support for a particular application, you may be told or read or learn that you will need to reference non-free as a tree in your deb line. So far this is going through pulling all the libraries. Here's ncurses, for example, which many programs use from the shell, SQLite, and a number of familiar C++ programs that are used in this environment. The transfer rate gives us a sense of how long this should take, roughly 28 minutes, 37 minutes. It'll oscillate because the file sizes are determined on the fly. So the app process doesn't know up front what it's dealing with respect to size in relation to current bandwidth, which is subject to change. So as fewer or more users are on the network passing traffic across the net, it will fluctuate or change the ETA of our downloads as expected. So you can't always trust the ETA that you see as a mere consequence of fluctuating bandwidth. So this scrolls towards the bottom. If you scroll towards the top while it's running, then you lose the ETA towards the bottom, as we just saw. So again, this is a distro upgrade. In a nutshell, one ideal way to perform this upgrade is to SSH into the target system, and in that way you will not be connected via a process that's likely to be restarted, such as x.org. Another thing we should suggest is that you perhaps drop the system to run level 3, which does not, or to run level 2, which does not run the GUI environment. If the GUI is not running, then you will not encounter problems when x.org packages are updated and causes X and GDM or KDM to restart. So that's another suggestion. Now, for obvious reasons, single user mode will not work with this particular type of update where we're referencing the network, because single user mode does not provide access to the network. So if you tried to reboot to single user mode with the particular deb line which points to the internet, mirrors.kernel.org/Debian, then it'll fail. However, if you had a mirror or perhaps the first DVD ISO image, as we do on the system, on the hard drive somewhere, perhaps off the file system var or opt or temp or wherever you place it, then that reference will work in single user mode because it is accessible locally. But if you have a reference for a system internal to your network on your intranet, that will also fail if you're in single user mode because networking services are not made available in single user mode. So just something to keep in mind. You need the network in the event that you're going to use an intranet or internet server to perform the upgrade. But if it's available locally, you don't. Now, another note, is that you can use an ISO image. We've downloaded the first DVD ISO image, which is about a full DVD's worth of information, to our /Linux CBT LVM managed mount point. That ISO image is currently mounted, and its hierarchy is set up similar to the mirror we saw online at mirrors.kernel.org. So long as the packages that are of interest, meaning in our case the roughly 1,200 packages or so, are available from that first DVD ISO image, then you can use that, if mounted, as a deb sources.list or apt sources.list reference. So you could use a deb line with the file URL and point to the mount point of the ISO image. But again, that depends heavily upon all of the packages required for the upgrade being available via that DVD1 image. If they are not, then at some point during the distro upgrade, you're likely to experience a failure to obtain various packages. So just keep that in mind as well. It's of importance, which is why we like to reference a full mirror, such as one on the net, or if you have to effect these changes to multiple systems, then simply mirror a mirror online. And there are a number of methods of doing it. If you check the Debian website, you'll see that there's a script provided by the Debian team which can be used to synchronize, which uses rsync to synchronize your local mirror with remote mirrors, either the Debian mirror or the mirrors.kernel.org mirror, or any of the universities or organizations that provide mirrored Debian binary packages for your particular platform. So you can sync it once and then run the script from time to time to keep it updated, and then point all of your internal systems to that particular server. And the server need not be an Apache web server. It can be any web server, such as IIS, for example, so long as the server provides access to the content via a protocol supported by apt, get, or aptitude, such as HTTP, FTP, then you can use any of the supporting services. So this is running along nicely. What we should do at this particular point is time-lapse it and pick it up towards the point where it has downloaded all the packages and is ready to apply those packages and upgrade our system. So now let's log in and reboot the system and ensure that it reboots accordingly. Let's check the run level, the host name, and we'll reboot. Squid should be terminated shortly. Let's navigate into the BIOS. And it did mention that it was unable to find one of the drives, the second drive, and this one is available, so let's see which one it's looking for. This one has an unknown ID, so it's probably SATA number 2. This is available as 500 gigs, and that's an IDE drive. So it's probably this drive, SATA number 2, that it's unable to figure out. That's a drive we added at some point. Now, insofar as the capabilities of this particular system. It's currently not set to 64-bit, so it's not a 64-bit chip. Slower bus speed, 800 megahertz, but hyperthreading capable is actually set. So let's just double check to see if there's somewhere else that this particular item can be enabled, and it's actually set to off. So let's turn this on. That's why the extra core, before it was actually called core technology, was not available. So let's exit and save the changes. Then this will bring us to the boot menu momentarily. And here's our boot menu. And here's our boot menu. Notice it's still loading 2626. And our server is back up. Let's log in. And we'll confirm the version, although it's already confirmed. And we're up. Check the file system layout. There is the root file system and the Linux CBT mounted terabyte, 2 terabyte file system. So that's up as well. And let's confirm the run level. It's in 2. So we're back up. We'll check the GUI mode momentarily. In the previous section, we booted the system. We noticed that the kernel 2632 was not present. So we decided to install the kernel using apt-get install Linux image in the version of the kernel, and that rectified the problem. It ran through a lot of dependency updates, and as a result, updated grub appropriately with the appropriate initial RAM disk, which is why we now have 2632 as a menu item. So we can now actually boot 2632, which has the latest UDEV, and will rid most of the errors that we saw. So if you encounter a similar problem, what you could do to get around it is to upgrade the kernel first from Lenny to 2632 for your platform, upgrade UDEV, and then perform the apt-get dist-upgrade. That should avoid most of the problems. We did it in reverse. It still worked out, but there were a few issues. So we just executed apt-get install and the version of the kernel. So now here's 2632. Let's launch it and bring the system up. And now the system's coming up with some errors regarding what will happen to config files in future releases. And the graphical environment is coming up. In the interim, we can navigate to a shell using Control-Alt-F1. And now we're in. And we're running 2632. So now we're up as expected, connected to the wire, listening to services on or various sockets by various services. So now we're up. So again, to rehash, we could use aptitude curses either or, aptitude curses or aptitude with the install Linux image and the version that's of interest. Aptitude search Linux image will help you to find a kernel that's suitable. This can be performed in the Lenny version as well. Once you have selected a kernel, say 2632, and let's say 686, then you can install that version and udev will be installed. If not, you can install udev, and then most of the errors will go away. Now let's cycle back to see if the desktop has come up on Control-Alt-F7, and there's the desktop. So we're up. Let's log out from Control-Alt-F1. And now this desktop has been secured.